The sun dipped low over the sprawling city park, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement where wildflowers pushed through the weeds like forgotten dreams. In the heart of it all stood a young woman named Elena, her fingers dancing across the strings of a weathered violin. She was alone, as she always was these days. The melody, she played a haunting lament that echoed the ache in her chest. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her simple dress, faded from too many washes, fluttered in the evening breeze. The notes rose and fell, pleading with the indifferent world around her. Joggers who hurried past without a glance, families picnicking on the grass who barely lifted their heads. Elena had come here every afternoon for months, pouring her soul into the music, hoping it might summon something, anything, to pull her from the edge of despair. But today, the park felt heavier, more oppressive. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she drew the bow across the strings, her mind replaying the eviction notice clutched in her coat pocket. The tiny apartment she'd shared with her late grandmother was slipping away, the medical bills from those final agonizing months piling up like unspoken accusations. She was 25, orphaned twice over, first by a car accident that stole her parents when she was a girl, then by the slow fade of the woman who'd raised her. The violin, a family heirloom etched with faint scratches from generations past, was all she had left. Its voice was her only currency in a city that chewed up dreamers and spat them out. As the last notes faded into the rustling leaves, a group of teenagers sauntered by, their laughter sharp and mocking. One of them, a lanky boy with a sneer, tossed a crumpled soda can at her feet. "Play something happy." "Freak!" he jeered, his friends erupting in chuckles as they wandered off. Elena's cheeks burned, but she swallowed the sting, packing her violin into its battered case. The park emptied as dusk settled, leaving her silhouetted against the fading light, a lone figure carrying the weight of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The roar shattered the quiet like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Elena froze, her heart pounding, as the low growl of motorcycle engines swelled from the street beyond the park's iron gates. Headlights pierced the twilight, slicing through the gathering gloom. Not one bike, but a dozen, then more, their chrome gleaming under the sodium lamps. The convoy rolled in like a mechanical herd, tires crunching over gravel paths meant for pedestrians. At the lead was a man on a black Harley, his leather jacket scarred from years of road and rain, salt and pepper hair tied back in a ponytail that whipped in the wind. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered and weathered, with eyes that held the quiet storm of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. His name was Marcus, though few called him that anymore. To his crew he was simply Hawk, the one who kept the old oaths alive. The bikes circled the park's edge, engines idling with a rhythmic purr that vibrated through the ground. Elena clutched her violin case tighter, stepping back instinctively as the riders dismounted. They weren't the menacing type from city tales. No chains or spikes, just worn denim, faded patches on their vests reading "Iron Oath Riders," and faces etched with the lines of hard-won loyalty. Hawk scanned the emptying green, his gaze landing on her like a spotlight. He nodded to his second, a burly woman named Riley with tattoos snaking up her arms, who killed the engines one by one. Silence fell, thick and expectant. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd heard stories of biker gangs claiming turf in forgotten corners of the city, but this felt different, purposeful, not predatory. Hawk approached slowly, his boots thudding softly on the path, the scent of leather and exhaust trailing him like a shadow. Up close, Eleanor saw the faint scar running along his jaw, a remnant of some long-ago fight he never spoke of. He stopped a respectful distance away, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice gravelly but kind, carrying the faint drawl of southern roads. "Reminded me of a promise I made years back, one I aimed to keep." Elena blinked, unsure if he was talking to her or the ghosts in his eyes. He tore out a page, scribbled something quick, and folded it neatly before tossing it toward her feet. It fluttered down like a fallen leaf, landing just within reach. "Read it when you're ready. Might just be the note that turns the tide." She hesitated, the paper crisp against the damp grass, but curiosity won. Unfolding it under the dim park light, Elena's eyes widened at the words. "I heard your song. Lost my sister to the same silence you're fighting. There's a place for voices like yours at the Iron Oath Hall. Come tomorrow at dawn. We'll ride for what's right. Your music, our word, Hawk." Her pulse raced. It wasn't pity, but an offer wrapped in the steel of unspoken vows. In that moment, as the bikers remounted and their engines faded into the night, Elena felt the first spark of something unbreakable, a promise not her own, but one that could rewrite her shattered path. The city lights flickered on one by one, painting the skyline in hues of amber and blue. But Elena lingered in the park long after the roar had gone. She slipped the note into her violin case, next to the yellowed photo of her grandmother smiling with bow in hand. The old woman had always said music was a bridge to the lost, a way to call back what the world tried to steal. Elena had believed it once, before the debts and the loneliness eroded her faith. Now, this stranger's gesture, a biker with a notebook and a memory of his own loss, stirred echoes of that belief. She walked home through streets alive with neon buzz and distant sirens, the violin's weight, a familiar anchor. Sleep came fitfully that night, dreams tangled with the growl of engines and melodies that refused to fade. Dawn broke with a soft pink glow filtering through her apartment window, the kind that promised renewal even in the face of ruin. Elena rose, her decision made in the quiet hours. She dressed in her best, the dress from her grandmother's closet, simple but elegant, and packed the violin carefully. The note burned in her pocket like a talisman. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, she caught the faint rumble again, distant but drawing near. The Iron Oath Hall, she'd learned from a quick search on her cracked phone, was on the city's outskirts, a converted warehouse where veterans and wanderers gathered. Bound by codes older than the roads they rode. It wasn't just a club, it was a sanctuary for the scarred, a place where promises were forged in fire and kept in silence. As she boarded the bus toward the edge of town, Elena's mind raced with questions. Who was Hawk, really? What loss had carved that scar into his soul? And why her, a street musician with nothing but strings and sorrow? The bus jostled over potholes, the skyline shrinking in the rear view, replaced by industrial sprawl and open lots. She clutched the case, fingers tracing the wood's grain, feeling the pulse of possibility. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a closing door, but a road unfolding, lined with the unlikely allies of leather and loyalty. The hall loomed as the bus pulled up, a sturdy brick building with banners fluttering in the breeze, symbols of oaths unbroken. Bikes lined the lot, more than the night before, their polished frames catching the sunrise like jewels. Hawk stood at the entrance, arms crossed, waiting. Riley flanked him, offering a nod that spoke volumes. "You came," Hawk said simply, no surprise in his tone, only the quiet satisfaction of a vow fulfilled. Elena stepped forward, violin in hand. "Your note." It felt like the music I needed to hear. He smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Then let's make some noise that echoes. The Iron Oath doesn't forget its own." Inside, the hall buzzed with quiet energy, men and women nursing coffee, sharing stories in low voices, the air thick with the aroma of fresh brew and oiled metal. Hawk led her to a corner stage, makeshift but sturdy, where spotlights hung from exposed beams. "Play for us," he urged, "not for coins, but for the promise." Elena's heart swelled as she lifted the violin, the bow steady in her grip. The first note soared, filling the space, drawing the riders closer. In that melody, she wove her pain, her grandmother's lessons, the biker's unexpected grace. Applause followed, not thunderous but genuine, a chorus of souls who'd chosen family from the fringes. As the morning unfolded, Hawk shared fragments of his story over a shared meal. A sister lost to illness, much like Elena's grandmother, and a vow to his crew to protect the vulnerable, no matter the cost. The Iron Oath had started as a band of veterans, bound by battlefield pacts, evolving into guardians against the city's underbelly. Corruption in shelters, forgotten artists crushed by bureaucracy. Elena's talent, he said, could be their voice, amplifying calls for justice in a world deaf to the quiet. She listened, the note's words now a bridge between their worlds. By midday, word had spread. A local radio station called. Intrigued by the tale of the violinist and the bikers, Elena performed again, this time for a small crowd gathering outside, her music a beacon. Hawk watched from the sidelines, his presence a shield. In his eyes, she saw the redemption they both sought, honoring the dead by lifting the living. The day stretched into promises of gigs, support for her debts, a chosen family ready to ride beside her. As the sun climbed high, Eleanor realized the note hadn't just changed her future. It had ignited a legacy of loyalty, one string at a time. The afternoon sun slanted through the warehouse windows of the Iron Oath Hall, casting golden bars across the scarred wooden floors where bootprints told stories of comings and goings. Elena lowered her violin, the final note lingering like a held breath in the air, thick with the scent of strong coffee and faint machine oil. The riders clapped again, their applause a steady rhythm, not overwhelming but solid, like the foundation of the old building itself. Hawk leaned against a nearby beam, his arms still crossed, but a subtle nod of approval softened the lines on his face. Riley, ever the sentinel, clapped her hands once sharply before turning to pour another round of coffee from a dented percolator on the counter. Eleanor stepped down from the stage, her legs feeling lighter than they had in weeks, the violin case warm in her hands, as if it had absorbed the hall's quiet energy. She joined Hawk at a long communal table, where plates of simple sandwiches, thick bread, fresh tomatoes from a community garden were passed around. The group was diverse, a tapestry of weathered faces, a former mechanic named Lucas with grease-stained fingers, a nurse called Sophia who'd traded scrubs for a leather vest after too many shifts in underfunded wards, and an older veteran, Jonathan, whose eyes held the distant thunder of battles long past. They listened as Hawk spoke, his voice low and measured, weaving Elena into their circle without fanfare. "You play like you've got ghosts to chase," Hawk said, sliding a plate toward her. "My sister Anna, she had that fire. Used to hum tunes in the kitchen while the world fell apart around us. Lost her to a system that promised care but delivered nothing. That's why we ride. Not for glory, but to keep the promises the rest forgot." Elena met his gaze, seeing the raw edge of that old wound mirrored in her own. She nodded, biting into the sandwich, the tang of mustard grounding her. "My grandmother taught me that music isn't just sound. It's a vow. She played through her pain, right up to the end. The bills. They're winning now, though. Eviction's coming." The table fell quiet, the weight of her words settling like dust after a storm. Riley leaned in, her voice a warm rumble. "We've seen that fight before. Shelters turning folks away, landlords with iron fists. But Iron Oath doesn't bend. We pool what we have, rides for gigs, hands for repairs. Your music could rally more than us." Jonathan chuckled softly, his silver hair catching the light. "Last year, we stood for a kid losing his home to some crooked developer, rode till the truth came out. No fists, just facts and noise that couldn't be ignored." Elena's mind reeled, picturing it, engines thundering not in rage, but in unity, a chorus against the silence. As the meal wound down, Hawk stood, gesturing toward a back room lined with shelves of old ledgers and faded photos, snapshots of rides through rain-slicked highways, gatherings under starlit skies. "Come see where the oaths start." He led her there, the door creaking open to reveal a wall of handwritten notes, pinned like badges of honor, each one a fragment. "Promised my brother I'd watch his back, kept it through the fire. Vowed to lift the forgotten, rode for her last breath." Elena traced one with her finger, the paper yellowed but the ink bold. "These are real?" Hawk's scar twitched as he smiled faintly. "Real as the road. Started with me and a handful after the war. Lost too many to broken words. Now we choose our family, seal it with ink and iron." Outside, the lot hummed with preparation. Bikes were polished, engines tuned with the rhythmic clink of wrenches, the air alive with the sharp scent of gasoline and rubber. Sophia approached Eleanor, handing her a small vest embroidered with the iron oath patch, a simple iron ring encircling a flame. "Wear it when you play next. Shows you're one of us." Eleanor slipped it on, the leather cool against her skin, heavier with meaning than any formal gown. It fit like it had been waiting, a quiet armor for the battles ahead. Word of the violinist's arrival spread like wildfire through the city's undercurrents. By late afternoon, a reporter from a local paper arrived, notepad in hand, drawn by whispers of bikers harboring an artist. Hawk fielded the questions with practiced ease, steering the story toward the heart. A young woman's talent stifled by debt, a crew ready to amplify her voice for causes that mattered, fundraisers for struggling families, protests against corrupt officials squeezing the vulnerable. Elena watched from the sidelines, her violin at her side, as Hawk's words painted them not as outlaws, but as keepers of justice in a cynical world. As dusk crept in, painting the sky in strokes of purple and gold, the group gathered for a planning session. Maps were unrolled on the table, marked with routes to upcoming events. A charity ride for a shelter on the brink, a performance slot at a veterans memorial. Elena's input was sought, her music envisioned as the thread binding their efforts. "Your strings could tell our stories better than any speech," Lucas said, his eyes earnest. But beneath the optimism, tensions simmered. Hawk's phone buzzed with a call from an old contact, rumors of a city councilman pushing policies that would shutter community spaces like the park where Elena had played, all to line pockets with development deals. "They're coming for the quiet places," Hawk muttered, his jaw tightening. "The ones where promises are born." Elena felt the shift, the air thickening with unspoken resolve. She lifted her violin unbidden, drawing the bow across the strings in a melody that started soft, building like a gathering storm, notes of defiance, laced with the warmth of chosen bonds. The riders stilled, listening as the music filled the hall, evoking dusty roads and unbreakable oaths. When it ended, Hawk placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture fatherly yet fierce. "That's the sound of redemption. Tomorrow we ride to the council meeting. Your voice with ours might just crack their walls." Night fell fully, stars pricking the velvet sky above the lot. Eleanor stood with the group, engines idling in anticipation, the vibration humming through her bones. The note from the park felt like a distant memory now, evolved into something larger, a pact sealed in music and loyalty. As they mounted up, headlights cutting the dark, she realized the change wasn't just hers. It rippled outward, a promise echoing into the unknown. The convoy pulled out, tires whispering over asphalt, carrying her toward confrontations where honor would be tested, and family forged in the fire of truth. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The city streets blurred into streaks of neon and shadow as the Iron Oath convoy carved through the night, engines thrumming like a collective heartbeat against the cool air. Elena rode pillion behind Riley, the woman's sturdy frame a steady anchor as the bike leaned into curves, wind whipping at the edges of her new vest. The violin case was strapped securely across her back, its presence a quiet reminder of the fragile power she now wielded. Up ahead, Hawk led the pack on his black Harley, his silhouette cutting a resolute path under the sodium glow of streetlights. The group wasn't massive, just 15 riders strong tonight, but their unity felt unbreakable, a rolling testament to oaths whispered in darker times. They arrived at the city council building as the clock tower struck 10, its facade a cold slab of marble illuminated by harsh floodlights, windows glowing like watchful eyes. Protesters had already gathered in clusters on the steps, signs clutched in weary hands. Pleas for affordable housing, warnings against land grabs that devoured community greens. The air hummed with murmurs of frustration, the faint scent of rain-dampened concrete mingling with the exhaust from idling cars. Elena dismounted, her boots touching pavement that still held the day's warmth, and followed Hawk through the thinning crowd. Riley stayed close, her presence a subtle shield, while Lucas and Sophia fanned out to mingle, ears open for the undercurrents of discontent. Inside, the meeting hall echoed with the shuffle of folding chairs and the low drone of fluorescent lights overhead. Rows of locals filled the space, faces etched with the quiet desperation of those fighting invisible tides, families squeezed by rising rents, artists like Elena, whose dreams were collateral in the march of progress. Hawk guided her to seats near the front, his hand light on her elbow, a gesture that spoke of protection without possession. The councilman at the podium, a slick figure named Harlan, with a practiced smile and a tie too perfectly knotted, droned on about urban renewal, his words polished to obscure the edges. "These developments will bring jobs, vitality," he intoned, gesturing to blueprints that promised towers where parks and small venues once stood, but Elena caught the flicker in his eyes. The way his gaze slid past the audience like they were mere obstacles. As the public comment period opened, tension coiled in the room, thick as the humid air seeping through cracked windows. A mother stood first, voice trembling as she described her shelter on the verge of closure, children displaced by funding cuts, funneled elsewhere. Harlan nodded sympathetically, but his notes remained untouched. Then it was Hawk's turn. He rose slowly, his leather creaking softly, commanding the space without raising his voice. "We've ridden these roads for decades," he began, his drawl steady, eyes locking on Harlan. "Seen promises made and broken. My crew, veterans, workers, folks like this young woman here, we stand for the quiet places, the parks where music lives, the homes that hold families together. Shutter them and you're not renewing, you're erasing." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, heads turning toward Elena as Hawk gestured her way. She felt the weight of their stares, a mix of curiosity and hope, and stood, violin case in hand. Her heart raced, but the notes from the hall earlier that day echoed in her mind, defiance woven with warmth. "Music isn't noise," she said, her voice clear, carrying over the hush. "It's memory. My grandmother played in that park, taught me to honor what's lost by lifting what's left. Take it away, and you silence more than strings. You break vows to the people who built this city." She didn't play, not here amid the rules and gavels, but her words landed like a melody, stirring nods and whispers. Harlan shifted, his smile tightening, but he offered no rebuttal, only a vague assurance of consideration. The meeting dragged on, but the seed was planted. Outside, as the convoy reformed under a sky now dotted with stars, riders shared glances heavy with unspoken strategy. Back at the hall, the group debriefed around the communal table, coffee steaming in mugs chipped from years of use. Jonathan leaned back, his chair creaking, and recounted a similar stand from his service days, standing firm not with weapons, but with truth that outlasted the fight. "Words like yours, Elena, they're the real armor," he said, his voice gravelly with age. Sophia nodded, adding tales of hospital shifts where bureaucracy buried the needy, her transition to the oath, a redemption of her own making. But as the night deepened, a shadow crept in. Hawk's phone lit up again, this time with a message from an old ally in the council offices. Harlan's ties ran deep, whispers of backroom deals with developers who eyed the Iron Oath Hall itself for redevelopment. The building, with its history of sheltering the displaced, was marked on preliminary maps. Elena's stomach knotted, the vest suddenly heavier on her shoulders. "They can't," she whispered, but Hawk's expression darkened, the scar along his jaw standing out in the lamplight. "They'll try. Seen it before. Power chews at the edges until you push back. We don't fight dirty, we fight true. Tomorrow we gather more voices. Your music leads the call." Riley poured another round, her tattoos shifting like living ink as she moved. "We've got routes planned, rallies at the park, performances that draw the light. But it starts with trust. Elena, you're the spark now." The group murmured agreement, Lucas sketching quick maps on a napkin, routes snaking through neighborhoods where similar threats loomed. Elena traced the lines with her finger, feeling the pull of this chosen family, their loyalty a balm against the isolation she'd known. Yet doubt flickered. What if her voice wasn't enough? The violin seemed to hum in response from its case, a silent vow urging her forward. By midnight, the hall quieted, riders drifting to bunks in the back or mounting up for home. Eleanor stayed, helping Sophia sort through old photos, faded images of rides that had saved small victories, faces alight with the glow of kept promises. One caught her eye. Hawk younger, arm around a woman who must have been Anna, their smiles fierce against a sunset road. "She'd have loved your playing," Sophia said softly, handing it over. Eleanor held it, the paper's texture rough under her fingertips, and felt the threads of loss binding them all. Redemption wasn't a solo aria, it was a chorus, harmonies born from scars. As she finally stepped into the cool night, the lot empty save for a few lingering bikes, Elena lifted her violin under the moon's pale watch. She played a quiet piece, notes drifting like smoke, evoking the roads ahead, twists of challenge, straits of solidarity. Hawk watched from the doorway, unseen, his nod a silent oath renewed. The city slept, but in that melody the fight stirred, promises rising with the dawn. Tomorrow would test them, pitting moral steel against institutional rust. But in the Iron Oath's embrace, Elena found her footing, ready to let her music bridge the divide. The first light of dawn crept over the industrial skyline, painting the Iron Oath Hall in soft greys and golds, the kind of light that whispered of new battles without the fanfare of trumpets. Elena stirred in the small bunkroom at the back, the thin blanket tangled around her from a night of restless dreams. Visions of crumbling parks and silenced strings, countered by the steady roar of engines holding the line. The air carried the faint, comforting tang of last night's coffee grounds and the metallic bite of dew on chrome. She rose quietly, slipping into her vest, its leather now familiar against her skin, like a second layer of resolve. Outside, the lot was already alive. Lucas tinkering with a bike's chain, the rhythmic clink echoing like a metronome, while Sophia stacked crates of flyers near the entrance, her movements efficient, born from years of turning chaos into order. Hawk emerged from the main hall, a steaming mug in hand, his ponytail damp from a quick rinse. He spotted Elena and nodded toward the communal table, where a map lay spread like a battle plan, marked with red ink lines snaking through the city's veins. "Morning comes early when vows are at stake," he said, his voice rough from the night's vigil. "Harlan's moves, they're not just talk. That message last night, confirms the hall's on their list, developers sniffing around, promising progress that buries places like this. Elena's fingers tightened on her violin case as she sat, the wood's grain grounding her. The hall wasn't just bricks and beams, it was the heartbeat of their chosen family. A sanctuary where lost souls like hers found echo. Losing it would unravel threads she'd only begun to weave. Riley joined them, wiping grease from her hands on a rag, her tattoos gleaming faintly in the rising sun. We've got allies waking up across town, veterans groups, artists collectives, even some council insiders tired of the rot. But we need noise, the kind that sticks. She tapped the map, circling a spot near the Central Park. Rally there today. Your music opens it, Elena. Draws the crowd, makes them feel the promise we're fighting for. Elena nodded, a flutter of nerves mixing with the spark of purpose. She'd never led anything, only followed melodies through solitude. But here, with these riders who'd traded war scars for road-worn loyalty, she felt the pull of something larger. Redemption not as a solo pursuit, but a shared symphony. The convoy assembled by mid-morning, bikes gleaming under the strengthening sun, engines purring in unison like a choir warming up. Elena rode with Sophia this time. The nurse's bike, a vintage model with a sidecar for her violin, strapped secure against the vibrations. The wind rushed past as they pulled onto the highway, carrying the sharp scent of asphalt warming and wild grasses from roadside medians. Hawk led again, his Harley cutting the air with purpose, the group a tight formation weaving through traffic that parted like reluctant waves. Elena's mind raced ahead to the park, the same cracked paths where her lament had drawn the biker's gaze. Now, it would host their stand, a poetic circle closing on Harlan's shadowed ambitions. They arrived to a modest gathering already forming, locals with handmade signs, families clustering on blankets, the air buzzing with tentative hope and the distant hum of city life. The park's wildflowers nodded in the breeze, their colors vivid against the encroaching threat of bulldozers. Hawk dismounted first, directing the riders to form a loose perimeter, not aggressive but present, their vests a visual oath against the indifference. Elena stepped onto the makeshift stage, a wooden platform near the old gazebo, her violin lifting to her shoulder as the crowd hushed. The bow met strings, drawing forth a melody that started gentle, like dawn's first light, building to swells of urgency. Notes evoking dusty roads traveled in solidarity, promises etched in the wind. Eyes turned, drawn by the music's pull. Joggers pausing mid-stride, picnickers setting down lunches, even a few skeptical onlookers softening at the edges. Jonathan stood at the stage's side, his silver hair catching the sun, ready to speak after her piece. As the final note faded, lingering like a held breath, applause rose, warm and growing. Elena lowered the instrument, her chest tight with the raw power of it, the way her grandmother's lessons had bloomed into this moment of collective voice. Hawk caught her eye from the crowd's fringe, his nod a silent anchor, reminding her that true strength lay in the quiet fulfillment of word given. Jonathan took the stage next, his voice steady, carrying the weight of decades. We've all lost something to the grind. Homes, loved ones, the spaces where we heal. This hall, this park, they're not lines on a map. They're vows to the forgotten. Harlan and his kind, they break 'em for profit, but we ride for integrity, for the family we choose when blood falls short. Murmurs built to cheers, signs lifting higher as riders, like Lucas handed out flyers detailing the threats. Community spaces eyed for luxury builds, funds diverted from those in need. Sophia moved through the crowd, sharing stories of hospital battles won through persistence, her words weaving Elena's music into a tapestry of shared struggle. But as the rally peaked, tension threaded the air like an off-key note. A sleek black SUV pulled up at the park's edge, tinted windows hiding watchful eyes, likely Harlan's people, gauging the resistance. Hawk's jaw set, but he kept his place, signaling the group to hold steady. No provocations. Their power was in the truth, not the clash. Elena felt the shift, her violin a talisman as she joined the speakers, adding her voice to calls for a petition drive, performances to fund legal stands. "Music remembers what systems forget," she said, her words simple but resonant. "Let's honor that, together." By afternoon, the gathering swelled to dozens. Petitions circulating like shared secrets, the scent of grilled food from nearby vendors mingling with the earthy park air. Riders mingled, offering rides home for the weary, their presence a bridge of loyalty. Yet whispers reached Hawke. Harlan's office had fast-tracked a hearing, aiming to label groups like Iron Oath as disruptions, justifying sweeps. Back at the hall as the sun dipped, the group reconvened, maps updated with new routes, door-to-door awareness runs, alliances with like-minded crews. Elena traced the lines, her doubt fading into determination. This was redemption's rhythm, not grand gestures, but persistent notes building to harmony. Night settled with a velvet hush, stars emerging over the lot as engines cooled. Elena stood alone for a moment, violin in hand, playing a soft interlude that carried the day's victories and looming tests. Hawke approached, his shadow long in the moonlight. "Your sound's binding us tighter. Harlan'll push. We'll push back with what's right." She met his gaze, seeing the echo of Anna in his resolve, her own losses fueling the fire. The chosen family around them, Riley sharpening tools, Lucas plotting logistics, Sophia organizing aid, formed an unbreakable circle, their oaths a shield against the encroaching dark. If this chapter stirred something in you, hit that like button below. It helps spread these stories of quiet courage far and wide. The moon hung low over the Iron Oath Hall, its silver light filtering through the warehouse's high windows like a watchful sentinel, casting elongated shadows across the communal table, where maps lay crumpled and marked with fresh annotations. Eleanor sat at the edge, her violin resting beside her like a trusted confidant, the wood still warm from the soft piece she'd played earlier. The air inside carried the lingering notes of that melody, haunting yet hopeful, mingled with the earthy scent of cooling engines from the lot outside and the faint, comforting aroma of Sophia's herbal tea steeping in mismatched mugs. The rally's energy still pulsed in her veins, a mix of triumph and trepidation as the group huddled close, voices low and deliberate under the hum of a single overhead bulb. Hawke paced slowly near the back wall, his boots echoing softly on the concrete floor, the scar along his jaw catching the light with each turn. He'd shed his jacket, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm, an iron ring encircling a flame, the emblem of oaths that had bound him through wars both literal and figurative. "Harlan's not bluffing," he said, stopping to lean on the table, his fingers tracing a red-circled spot on the map. The hall itself, vulnerable amid the sprawl of proposed developments. That SUV at the park? Scouts, they're mapping resistance, looking for cracks. If we push too hard, they label us troublemakers. Permits revoked, rides impounded, but fold, and we lose the heart of what we are. His eyes met Eleanor's, holding the weight of shared loss. A silent reminder that this fight echoed the silence that had claimed his sister and her grandmother. Riley nodded, her burly frame shifting as she crossed her arms, tattoos flexing like coiled springs. "We've danced this before. Last spring, a similar suit tried to shutter a vet's outreach center. We rode the truth, letters from folks we'd helped, stories that hit the airwaves. No chaos, just clarity." She glanced at Elena, a rare softness in her gaze. "Your music's our edge now. It cuts through the noise, makes them remember why these places matter." Lucas chimed in from his seat, wrench still in hand from an earlier tune-up, his grease-stained fingers drumming the table. "I've got contacts at the print shop, flyers ready by dawn, routes to hit the neighborhood's hardest squeezed, door to door, like Jonathan said." The older veteran grunted in agreement, his silver hair tousled, eyes distant as if replaying old campaigns. "It's about the long haul. One note at a time. Build the chorus." Elena absorbed their words, the vest on her shoulders feeling less like borrowed armor and more like an extension of her own resolve. Doubt had flickered earlier, a shadow of the isolation that had defined her days in the park, but here, surrounded by these riders who'd chosen loyalty over ease, it dimmed. She thought of the note Hawk had tossed her that twilight evening, its simple ink now a catalyst for this unfolding stand. "What if they come for us directly?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "The hall. It's become home. If it's gone, where do the lost go?" Hawk stopped pacing, placing a hand on the table near hers, not touching but close enough to bridge the space. "Then we rebuild. Oaths don't die with bricks, but we fight clean. Petitions, performances, alliances. Your strings lead the way." As the planning stretched into the small hours, the group divided tasks with the precision of a well-rehearsed ensemble. Sophia organized a roster for aid drops, groceries and medical kits to families teetering on eviction's edge, her nurse's instincts turning empathy into action. Jonathan sketched speeches, drawing from tales of service where moral compasses outlasted orders. Elena contributed ideas for a benefit concert, envisioning the park transformed into a stage where music and testimony intertwined, amplifying voices Harlan sought to mute. The air grew thicker with purpose, punctuated by the occasional clink of mugs and the soft scratch of pens on paper. Outside, a lone bike engine coughed to life as a scout rider headed out for reconnaissance, its taillight fading into the night like a promise carried forth. By the time the first hints of dawn grayed the horizon, exhaustion tugged at them, but resolve held firm. Elena stepped out onto the lot, the cool pre-morning air brushing her skin, carrying the sharp tang of dew on metal and distant rain. She lifted her violin, drawing the bow in a quiet prelude, a melody of gathering strength, notes rising like mist from the asphalt. The others emerged one by one, pausing to listen, their silhouettes framed against the awakening sky. Hawk joined her last, his presence a steady counterpoint. "Anna would have stood right here," he murmured, voice barely above the strings. Humming along, fighting the fade. Elena's bow faltered for a heartbeat, then resumed, weaving his memory into the music. In that shared silence, she felt the threads of their chosen family tighten, a bond forged not in blood, but in the quiet honor of standing for the silenced. The day unfolded with methodical intensity. Riders fanned out on pre-planned routes, engines rumbling through quiet streets lined with modest homes and fading storefronts. Elena rode with Riley again, the bike's vibrations syncing with her pulse as they distributed flyers at community centers and corner markets. The papers bore bold headlines: "Save our spaces, honor the promises," illustrated with sketches of parks alive with music and halls bustling with support. Whispers turned to conversations. A shop owner nodded grimly, sharing tales of rent hikes that mirrored Elena's own struggles. "Your song from the rally. It's sticking," he said, pocketing a stack. At each stop, Elena played brief interludes, her violin a portable beacon, drawing clusters of listeners whose faces softened with recognition of their shared stakes. Midday brought them to a veterans' memorial on the city's edge, a stone plaza etched with names that evoked Hawk's haunted gaze. Here the group linked with another crew, silver-haired riders on classic machines, their patches echoing the Iron Oath's flame. Elena performed on the steps, the melody swelling over the open space, evoking roads traveled in brotherhood and the cost of forgotten vows. Applause followed, mingled with signatures on petitions that grew by the handful. Jonathan spoke beside her, his words a bridge between generations. "We serve so places like this endure, not for monuments, but for the living who need them." Sophia collected medical stories, tales of delayed care in underfunded clinics, fueling the narrative against Harlan's cuts. But as the sun arced toward afternoon, the shadow lengthened. A call came through on Hawk's radio from a lookout. Harlan's office had issued notices, citing public safety concerns, to inspect the hall that very evening. Tension rippled back through the group as they reconvened at a neutral diner on the outskirts, booths filled with the scent of fries and strong brew. Maps were refolded, strategies adjusted, riders to stand witness, Elena's music to greet the inspectors with unyielding grace. "They want intimidation," Hawk said, his drawl edged with steel. "We give them truth." Elena's hands trembled slightly on her case, but she met his eyes, the violin's promise steadying her. This was the ethical precipice. Confront corruption not with fury, but with the integrity that outshone it. As they mounted up for the return, the convoy stretched longer now, bolstered by Allied bikes, a rolling wave of loyalty cutting through the golden light. Elena rode in the heart, wind carrying fragments of her earlier melody, a harbinger of the stand ahead. The hall awaited, its walls holding generations of oaths, and in the face of Harlan's grasp, they would defend it with the quiet power of kept words. Music and iron united, redemption's chorus rising against the tide. The sun hung heavy in the late afternoon sky, its rays slanting through the diner's grimy windows like bars of molten gold, illuminating the crumpled maps and half-empty coffee mugs on the scarred formica table. Elena's fingers drummed lightly on her violin case, the leather strap worn smooth from the day's rides as the weight of the impending inspection settled over the group like a gathering storm cloud. Outside, engines idled in the parking lot, their low rumble vibrating through the pavement, carrying the sharp tang of hot exhaust and sun-baked asphalt. Hawk's radio crackled faintly on the table, the scout's voice cutting through. Inspectors en route, 2 vans, official plates, Harlan's pulling strings. The words hung in the air, thick with the scent of frying oil from the kitchen, but no one flinched. Instead, a quiet resolve rippled through the riders, their faces etched with the lines of battles won not by force, but by the unyielding truth of kept oaths. They mounted up without haste. The convoy swelling to 20 strong now, Allied bikes joining the fold like reinforcements answering a silent call. Elena rode pillion behind Hawk this time, her arms steady around his waist, the violin's case secured in a saddlebag that bounced rhythmically against the frame. The wind rushed past as they pulled onto the highway, whipping her hair and carrying the faint, salty whisper of distant ocean air from the city's edge. Hawk's ponytail streamed like a banner, his broad back a wall against the uncertainties ahead. "This is where promises meet the fire," he said over his shoulder, voice gravelly but steady, cutting through the engine's roar. Elena nodded against the leather of his jacket, feeling the emblem's raised threads under her cheek, the iron ring, symbol of bonds that bent but never broke. The hall wasn't just a building, it was the vessel for their chosen family, a refuge where losses like Anna's and her grandmother's were honored through action, not forgotten in silence. The Iron Oath Hall came into view as the sun dipped lower, its brick facade bathed in the warm amber of twilight. Banners fluttering softly in the breeze like weary flags after a long march. Riders dismounted in the lot, boots crunching on gravel scattered with oil stains that gleamed like dark mirrors. Sophia and Riley positioned themselves at the entrance, arms crossed, their presence a subtle line of defense. Not aggressive, but immovable, tattoos and vests speaking of loyalty forged in harder fires. Lucas and Jonathan fanned out to the sides, handing final flyers to a small cluster of locals who'd heard the whispers and arrived to stand witness. Neighbors with petitions in hand, eyes alight with the spark Elena's music had ignited at the rally. The air hummed with anticipation, laced with the earthy scent of cooling metal and blooming night jasmine from a nearby fence. The inspection vans arrived precisely on the hour, tires hissing to a stop, doors slamming with official finality. Two men in crisp suits and hard hats emerged, clipboards in hand, flanked by a pair of uniformed officers whose badges caught the fading light. Harlan wasn't there in person, but his shadow loomed in their clipped tones and averted gazes. "Routine check for code violations," the lead inspector announced, his voice echoing off the bricks, though the tremor in it betrayed the pressure from above. "Council orders, safety concerns reported." Hawk stepped forward, his frame blocking the doorway just enough to invite, not impede. "Welcome, we've nothing to hide, but oaths run deep here, mind your step through our history." He gestured inside, leading them through the hall's heart. The communal table lined with ledgers of aid given, walls pinned with notes of promises fulfilled, the air still carrying echoes of Eleanor's earlier melodies. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, her violin unslung and ready, heart pounding like a drum in the quiet space. The inspectors poked at beams and wiring, their lights flashing over faded photos of rides that had saved homes and hearts, but their questions sharpened when they reached the back room. "Unpermitted gatherings," one muttered, scribbling furiously. "Potential fire hazard with all this. Memorabilia." Jonathan interjected calmly, his silver hair haloed by a nearby lamp, recounting how the hall had sheltered storm-displaced families. No violations, only lives mended. Sophia added details from her nursing days, tying the space to community health drives that Harlan's cuts had undermined. Tension coiled, the officers shifting uncomfortably as locals outside murmured, their voices a growing undercurrent like wind through reeds. But it was Elena who turned the tide. As the lead inspector paused near the stage, his pen hovering, she lifted her violin without a word. The bow met strings in a melody that started soft, a lament for spaces silenced, building to swells of defiance, notes evoking the park's wildflowers crushed under progress, the hall's walls echoing with lost voices like Anna's hum or her grandmother's lessons. The music filled the room, sensory and raw, the violin's warm resonance vibrating through the air, mingling with the faint creak of floorboards under boots and the distant call of evening birds. The inspectors froze, clipboards forgotten, faces softening as the melody wove through their defenses, stirring memories of their own overlooked promises. Perhaps a father's workshop shuttered, a mother's song in a kitchen long gone. When the final note faded, silence held for a breath. Then applause erupted from the riders and locals alike, steady and unyielding. The lead inspector cleared his throat, glancing at his partner. "On second review, seems compliant, will report favorably." They retreated hastily, vans pulling away into the dusk, taillights blurring like retreating shadows. Whispers spread instantly, Harlan's ploy exposed. Petitions flooding council inboxes, media snippets from the rally gaining traction. Back inside, the group exhaled collectively, mugs raised in a quiet toast, the air lighter now, scented with relief and fresh brewed tea. Hawk placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, his eyes crinkling with the first true smile she'd seen. "Your music didn't just play, it spoke for us all. Anna's watching, proud." Elena felt tears prick, not of sorrow, but release. The note from the park, a seed that had grown into this victory, redeeming her isolation through shared honor. The chosen family encircled her. Riley's nod of fierce pride, Lucas's grin amid grease smudges, Sophia's warm embrace, Jonathan's steady gaze. Outside, stars emerged one by one, the lot alive with soft conversations as plans shifted to protection, ongoing vigils, alliances sealed. As night deepened, Elena stepped onto the lot alone for a moment, violin in hand, playing a triumphant coda under the moon's glow. The melody soared, a bridge from loss to legacy, promising that in a world of broken words, loyalty endured like iron. The hall stood firm, its lights a beacon, And in that harmony, Helena found her future, not solitary strings, but a chorus of unbreakable oaths, riding into tomorrow. Thank you for joining this journey of quiet courage and kept promises. If these stories of redemption touch your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more tales of honor and family waiting on the road ahead.